Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Summer of Sarah. I'm Irene, and this is double booked, but we are just going to jump right into everything today. I'm just going to skip over everything because I just want to make sure that we get into this book. I have a lot to say, and this week we're going to be covering Just Listen. This is one of my favorite books. If okay, so it's either this one or this lullaby that I read first by Sarah Dessen. I can't truthfully remember because I think I read them around the same time, like literally back to back. So I'm not 100% sure, but I adore this book. I love it in my heart of hearts. I think this might be one of my favorite Sarah Dessen books, if not my favorite one. And that's really hard for me to say just because I love so many of her books. There is something, though, I've also noticed with this book, and it's the fact that Sarah Dessen is incredibly timely with her books. And I think her books are always timely because she always is talking about things that are still relevant today. Like, trigger warning for this book, she does talk about sexual assault as well as eating disorders. I don't know if that's going to get me flagged on YouTube, but I truthfully don't really care because I think this is an important topic to talk about. But she talks about it in this book, and I think that we get a glimpse into a life that we might not have, but it also is just timely because I feel like those things never really go away, and I don't think they'll ever really go away, truthfully, no matter how much we would like it to, no matter how much we would like, society to be better. Unfortunately, I think this is um, just something we're going to have to deal with whether or not we like it. And it can get a lot better, and we can do a lot better. We still can, even after Me Too and everything. I just think it's going to, regardless, take some time. Also, I can feel my eye twitching. This left eye, for some reason, has been twitching uncontrollably lately. It's allegedly just an allergy thing, but if you see it just like start twitch it, like the eyelid itself, just know that that's it. But let's jump into the book. Um, I also wanted to say Sarah Dessen wrote a lot of these books in the early 2000s, and I think it was very brave of her. And I don't mean that like in a, wow, she's so admirable. I mean, I think it was the right thing to do. And I think it takes somebody to do the right thing to be like, yeah, that person did a great job. Because she wrote these books in like the early 2000s. And in the early 2000s, they didn't really care about eating disorders in the same way. They didn't necessarily care about sexual assault in the same way. It's not to say that they didn't recognize these things happen, but I feel like it was more of a punchline at that point. Me Too didn't happen until what, 2016, 2018? Like, that's still fairly recent in the grand scheme of things. And I think that Sarah has really, I'm sorry, I don't know why my light just turned off. Give me 1 second. So my light has just turned off. I'm not sure why, but we're just gonna roll with it. But I think it's really brave to write about it in a time where I feel like nobody was writing about it, nobody was really talking about it in the same way. Just jump into a quick synopsis of the book. Annabelle Green is our main character. She has two older sisters who both modeled, and she follows in their footsteps and models as well. We quickly find out that she doesn't necessarily love modeling, and she only keeps going and doing it because this is what pulled her mom out of her grief when Annabelle's grandma, her mom's mom, died. So she was best friends with a girl named Sophie, but that ended when Annabelle allegedly hooked up with her boyfriend. We also find out that Annabelle ditched her old best friend Clark to be best friends with Sophie. That does come to play later, naturally. But then Annabelle and Sophie stop being friends after she allegedly hooks up with her boyfriend. Um, and Annabelle meets Owen, a misunderstood guy. He's a big guy, he did get in a fight in a parking lot and did have to spend some time in juvie. He is intense, but he's also a really kind, sweet person. And he is a bit angry, but he is learning to deal with that. And, just as everybody else, he also has his flaws. Annabelle and Owen get to know each other, and she starts listening to his weekly radio show, which is which is wild because he does play random things on there, like a faucet dripping. He definitely has an eclectic music taste, if that's what you want to call it. They have these lively discussions, and Owen just really helps Annabelle feel at home and be able to actually open up and talk to somebody for the first time in a really long time. And he helps her feel comfortable, in my opinion, with the world. And, we find out that that's really important to her. And he is just a huge influence on her to speak openly and honestly about things and just really tell people how you feel, because we find out that Annabelle tends to keep a lot of things inside. And eventually, he and his honesty really help Annabelle come out and say what really happened that night between Sophie's boyfriend and Annabelle. So, the start of the book really portrays loneliness, in my opinion, very well. As somebody who was more of a loner, who, if I didn't have like two friends at lunch, like I would be sitting alone. Not that it's that deep. Like, trust me, it really wasn't. I would just go read. Annabelle go through her first day of school after everything that's happened, after all the rumors that have circulated all summer and everything. Her ex-best friend sees her and calls her a bitch. And right off the bat, I'm just like, what happened? Was it that deep? And I mean, later we do find out it's kind of that deep, but not for the reasons you might think. She's living in autopilot mode, and some might call it survival mode. You can tell with the way she recalls things through little flashbacks throughout this book. So this book is also heavily centered on flashbacks. I personally love flashbacks. That is one of the things I love as a literary tool. And I know it's not everybody's cup of tea, but it's one of my favorite things in the world. I don't know why. I just think it's always so fun. But book, though, I think it's especially important to have these little flashbacks because, in my opinion, it highlights how alone she is, and she's reflecting on the pieces of her life that have kind of led her up to here. And I think that that's a really important tool to kind of realize, because once she kind of stops living in the past, she stops kind of thinking back on these things. And I think she writes these, and she being Dessen writes these books. For me personally, no, I'm kidding. But I think that I feel like she's very relatable in the sense that she writes these books in these ways so you can kind of see these people go through their depressive episodes, their, harsher periods of life, I would say. And I think it speaks to me personally because I do suffer from depression and anxiety. So sometimes when I'm in these depressive episodes, I will sit there and I will think, what has led me to here? What are these things that, kind of got me to this point, and what could I have done differently? Um, I don't think she does this often from what I recall from reading her books. Again, I have to read the other ones in order to really be able to tell you a full detailed piece on this, on flashbacks and everything. But I do think she tends to use flashbacks to convey this feeling of loneliness. Like, again, just that the feeling of loneliness paired with the flashbacks goes, how did I get here? How am I so alone? This is what I just think. I could be 100% wrong. I would love, Sarah, if you're listening, I would love to know. Truthfully, I would. But her first day of school is over. She's finally able to go home. Her mom gives her a call and is like, hey, I've got a modeling job, or an audition, I should say. It's like on the other side of town. So she doesn't want to do it, but her mom kind of convinces her into doing it. So she goes. She's barely, she's barely holding it together. So this is the first of many times we see Annabelle put her own emotions aside in order to kind of benefit somebody else, essentially. So we see her do that, and then she goes to this audition. And modeling is such a hard industry. A lot of things that are adult things, like modeling, acting, just, having a career at such a young age, essentially, I think is really hard on kids for so many reasons, but the main one being that they're just kids at the end of the day. And I think that Annabelle's mom forgets that. And I think that not that she doesn't care, but I think that she thinks that they love it. And so she'll continue to help them doing it. Annabelle sees it as her mom loves it, so she's going to keep doing it for her mom instead of telling her mom how she actually feels. So it's kind of a twofold at that point, right? We also find out at this point that her sister, Whitney, who is the middle child, has an eating disorder. She had gone to move to New York with her sister, Kristen. So the eldest sister, so it's Kristen, Whitney, and then Annabelle. Kristen had moved to New York for modeling, ends up not really modeling a lot because she's more curvy. And of course, this is the early 2000s, so the term quote unquote heroin chic was in. Um, And so her sister decides, I'm going to waitress, do whatever, go back to school. But Whitney goes and she goes to model. We find out again through these series of flashbacks that Kristen knows that Whitney has an eating disorder and is telling their parents, like, something's wrong. She's not doing well, all of these things. And Whitney's like, I'm just tired. I'm overworked. And she's like, she's at the gym all the time and she's not eating. Like, something's not right. And then she ends up getting hospitalized. And then they end up moving her back home because she does have this eating disorder. Whitney is in remission for her eating disorder, and she has gone to, she just come out of the hospital. She's in therapy groups, all of those things. And so her mom has her by her side constantly. And I get how frustrating it must be to have your independence taken away from you like that. But, at the end of the day, people are doing this because they care about you and they want her to be well, and be around for a long time. I think one of the things I really appreciate about this book, though, is the fact that Kristen, the eldest sister, even though it strained her relationship with Whitney, I think it's really commendable that she was like telling her parents, like, something's wrong, before something, before it became too late to help her. So I think even though it strained their relationship, even though it took a while for them to come back to each other, I think it's a really really beautiful touch on sibling relationships and friendships and things like that, because of the fact that, she cared, and she might have seemed like a hard ass, but she cared about her sister. She wanted her to get better. So I commend Kristen a lot for that, because that's not an easy thing to do. It's a really hard thing to call out somebody and then face the consequences of calling out somebody for whatever it might be. um, I've had it. I've lost friendships over certain things, but it's a really commendable thing to do, truthfully. I think that in this book, we see Whitney not pay a lot of attention to Annabelle. We see Whitney kind of have a resentment towards her because two reasons. One, because she is still modeling, and then two, because she is independent. She can do all of these things. She has her own car. She drives around. Um, and she doesn't have to have her parents watching her every move. But in my opinion, if her parents had paid attention, if her parents had noticed how Annabelle was acting and actually been, focusing on her instead of her sister. And that's not a dig on her sister. It's just, it's very hard for parents to focus on everybody equally, especially when somebody needs more attention than the other. However, they might have noticed how much Annabelle has changed, how much she has pulled back, how much she has, just really not been herself, and how she's actually kind of suffering and wasting away almost. Um, I do think this is the hard part about being a parent, because it's not like one child suffers at a time and then you can take care of it like back to back. Unfortunately, a lot of these things happen simultaneously. And Annabelle and Whitney are suffering. Kristen seems to be doing well, but these two are going through some huge life changes, and it's hard because they only seem to be noticing Whitney right now. But anyway, Kristen seems to be doing well in New York. I personally love New York City. I get it. I feel like I come alive there. If you ever see me in New York, trust me, I'm a different person. Anyway, so we go through these flashbacks again, where you see how Sophie and Annabelle became friends, how Annabelle and Clark stopped being friends. And then you also see how Sophie started dating her current boyfriend, how she was always going to other women's houses, bitching them out because allegedly they were hooking up with her boyfriend. And you also see how off Annabelle felt when she was around her boyfriend, whose name was Will, because he was kind of weird. Like, he was always just like staring too much, not talking enough, so Annabelle would overcompensate by oversharing and talking a lot. It's a natural defense mechanism, I would say, and we see why, of course, later. Okay, sorry, my light is not working again, so I turned it back on. It was really, really bothering me. I don't know what's going on with it, so if it turns off again randomly, it is what it is. Parents decide to start giving Whitney a little bit more independence. So Whitney decides to take Annabelle's car to the mall and is going to be out. And so after that, she drops Annabelle off at school, and then Annabelle's having another crappy day. She sees Sophie get picked up by her boyfriend, and it causes Annabelle to kind of spiral. So she, ends up in a bush throwing up, and then her mom calls and is like, hey, your sister's actually having a really good time at the mall, allegedly, even though we all think she just wants to have more independence, which is fine, but don't do it at the expense of somebody else. That's just my opinion. We get to the point where Annabelle and Owen, like, officially meet. Owen comes over and kind of helps her through this and talks her through this and everything. And then she needs a ride home and he offers her one. So he ends up taking her home, and, it's kind of cute and they're sweet to each other. It's a little awkward because they've never really spoken to each other. And I personally love a knight in shining armor moment. Truthfully, I love all sorts of romantic tropes. So if you have a romantic trope you love, I probably love it too. There's very few that I don't like. I'm trying to think of any off the top of my head, and truthfully, I cannot. Anyway, another thing I noticed in Dessen's books are the fact that she always has the main character kind of open up to people who are complete strangers to them, at least in Just Listen, This Lullaby, and The Truth About Forever. I'm not saying it's every single book. Again, I haven't read the majority of them in a really long time. These ones are fresh in my mind, but it seems that these main characters don't feel comfortable and emotionally safe with people around them. So they tend to go for other people who, or not other people, but they tend to open up to people who, might not know them that well, who are strangers essentially, because, they're just like, you know what, it is what it is. If I can't trust the people in my own home, why shouldn't I be able to trust a stranger? I don't truthfully know the reasoning behind it, but I've also noticed that that's a pattern in these books. Back to Annabelle and Owen in the car, she realizes that he must have heard rumors about her because she's heard rumors about him. That Owen's sister is a huge fan of Annabelle's because she's a local model and everything, and his sister, her name is Mallory, she's very into modeling, and she really is obsessed with all the work that Annabelle has done, and I think it's actually super, super cute just because it's sweet to look through the innocent lens of a child who doesn't understand, the more complex problems and things that grown-ups might be going through, or just other people in general, because I think she's about 13 and Annabelle's about 17, 18, so it's definitely very different. So we find out that Owen has his own radio show. We find out here that he has a bit of an eclectic taste, and that he listens to everything and anything, and I think that's a really beautiful thing, because he's like, look, I probably find out how much music I actually don't like, but I also find out how much music I actually do like, and he's a seemingly very glass half full type of guy, and that's awesome because I'm not. So I think that's great, and I apply that to books as well, even if I don't finish them, even though it's very hard for me to put a book down, even if I don't like it, because I want to know what happens at the end. I think it's a great way to kind of like look at things being like, look, we might find out what we don't like, but we also will find out what we do like. One of the things I truthfully love about Owen, and reading this book, I forgot how much I loved him as a character. He admits his faults. He's like, yes, I get angry. Yes, I have to do anger management. Yes, I have to do all of these things. He's like, but I never want someone to feel like I'm not being honest with them. And we find out that Annabelle definitely keeps in a lot, but she feels like she can't be emotionally honest for so many reasons. One of them being like, she thinks that people won't believe her. She thinks that people will, they judge, so she's afraid of the judgment, which is totally natural. I mean, you don't want someone picking apart everything you do all the time, but I do think that that is one thing that I love between Annabelle and Owen, and that puts this book in like my top two for sure, or top three, and it might even be my top book depending on how you look at it. Is that they're so open and honest with each other, that they end up trusting each other a lot, and that they don't hold back, which does come to an end when Annabelle gets triggered, but we'll get there later. One of my absolute favorite scenes in the book happens when Owen lends Annabelle his jacket, and she goes to return it because she's like, oh, your iPod is in here. I know you would miss that. But he is in the middle of helping his little sister with a photo shoot. And she has all her friends over. They're doing a photo shoot. They're having a sleepover, and everything is just chaotic. This is also when Annabelle and Owen kiss for the first time. They're having this like kind of deep moment. He's like, well, that's not how I see you. This is how I see you. And then they're in the doorway, and he kisses her. It's super cute and everything. But I think the moment of the whole photo shoot and everything is just very reminiscent of my childhood and just like dressing up. And, I'm not saying fighting is great, but it's just like a natural thing that happens in life, and just everybody being annoyed. But, at the end of the day, everybody is kind of happy because they did it and they like doing it and all of those things. I just think it's a really cute moment. And I think that Annabelle and Owen have something great. In high school, I was way too opinionated for boys. Go figure. I'm an opinionated person. And I know it wasn't probably all just my opinions. It was just who I was as a person as well. Um, but it's nice to see someone bonding with a friend platonically and then before eventually getting together. Again, one of those things I love is a slow burn. Love enemies to lovers. I love all of it. Okay. I'm a romance trope girly to the end. Regardless, we get to a point where Rowdy, who is Owen's best friend, Annabelle and Owen go to a bar called the Bendo. If you've read this lullaby, you know what that bar is. We'll talk about it next week. We meet Remy and Dexter again, whom I personally very much love as well. But before that, Annabelle is walking in a local fashion show. She hears that Sophie's now best friend, who also models, I think her name was Emily or something like that, um, is pressing charges against Will, Sophie's boyfriend, because he assaulted her the night before at a party. It causes Annabelle to spiral, and we find out that Annabelle was also assaulted by Sophie's boyfriend at a summer party, the year before. And Sophie was the one that caught them. Annabelle went into a freeze survival mode and couldn't respond to Sophie's questions, couldn't admit it, because I think she was also still probably trying to process it herself. And it's a completely normal response, but Sophie just assumed the worst, and her boyfriend was like, she came on to me, even though he coaxed her into it, like, because he was calling her out for her, and she thought it was some other guy that she had been talking to because he wasn't feeling well. And he shut the door and like shoved her down on the ground and got on top of her. So I mean, it was pretty harsh. And and then for him to be like, well, she came on to me and blah blah blah. And I know he's lying for a reason, but it's so gross. It's honestly a horrible thing to do to somebody. And it's just, I think that Sarah Dessen is touching on something that's so common amongst young women. You know, people, it's unfortunate. I would like to say it's very unfortunate. We as a society need to do better. And it can be a preventable problem if we teach people to treat others with kindness and respect and understand that somebody else's body is not our entitlement. So it's a huge problem, not only facing, United States, South America, whatever. It's facing the whole world, and especially it happens to women. I'm not saying it doesn't happen to men, because it definitely does, but it does happen to women a lot, especially when they are, at a party and drinking. And you know it's it's frustrating because drinking is not an excuse to hurt somebody. And people are like, well, drinking is not an excuse to like let your guard down, blah blah blah, like she shouldn't have been drinking that. Why shouldn't somebody be able to go out and have a drink and enjoy themselves without worrying that they're going to be assaulted by somebody? That is ridiculous. That is an absurd thing to think, because you know what, you shouldn't think that you're so entitled to somebody else and their body. Like, how dare you? And unfortunately, Annabelle has been suffering in silence. And I just want to say, if something like that has happened to you at a party, whenever, wherever, it is not your fault. You did not deserve it. You deserved so much better. And if you or somebody you know is suffering and you are looking for some resources, a good resource is the National Sexual Assault Hotline. Their number is 1-800-656-4673, and I will link it below as well. I will link resources in the description. You don't deserve anything that has happened to you, and I'm so very sorry if that has. To the book, she deserved better. There have been so many rumors that Sophie's boyfriend was always cheating on her. He seems to be a predator. Those women probably didn't want to speak out because, again, they were at a party, they were underage drinking, whatever it might be. And unfortunately, the law looks down upon that instead of looking down upon somebody who's an actual predator. It makes me so angry. Men are disgusting. I'm not saying that people in general aren't, but so many people in the world suffer at the hands of others when it is just so unnecessary, and it's just an exertion of power for whatever reason, and it's just horrible. To get back into the book, though, there is a secondary romance between Owen's best friend Rowdy and this girl that. So he's a karate instructor, and some girl kicked him, and he's been in love with, like, really hard, like, really, really badly. And so naturally, he falls in love with her, and it turns out it was Clark Reynolds, Annabelle's ex-best friend. She ends up being at the bar that night that Annabelle, Owen, and Rowdy go, and she introduces Rowdy to Clark. Annabelle realizes that, people might need some time to cool off, that Clark was pissed at her in that moment, but she wasn't going to be pissed at her forever. Um, it doesn't mean that people stop caring. It's an important theme. And then Owen keeps pressing Annabelle about what's wrong, and she keeps denying that anything's wrong, even though something clearly is. And so she does what she does best and leaves and abandons. And so Owen gets upset and they stop talking. And it breaks my heart because Annabelle doesn't feel like she can trust anybody, even though Owen has really given her no reason not to trust her. Not to trust him, I should say. She couldn't trust her so-called best friend because her boyfriend assaulted her. And I don't think Sophie was a great friend before that, but it just kills me inside because so many people go through these. Anyway, the other girl who was assaulted by Will, who's pressing charges, reaches out to Annabelle. She says she has a lawyer and that if Annabelle wants to talk, she can. And she gives her card, and then she ends up just losing it, which is totally understandable. She has a complete breakdown. She goes to the bathroom, and who's there but Clark? Clark tells her that her and Rowdy kind of started dating, that Owen misses her, and that he is worried about her. And it's kind of sweet how they reconnect and form a more adult relationship and kind of realize the mistakes of their past. On Sunday, which is when Owen has his shows, Annabelle goes to find him because she realizes that she was wrong and that she he deserved to know the why and everything. And she goes and talks to him, and she tells him that she's scared that he won't believe her, and so she tells him everything that's happened, and the first thing he says is, "I'm so sorry that happened to you." And from there they talk about whether or not she's going to call the lawyer, and he says, if you call the lawyer, it's not a commitment to do anything, it's just a phone call. It doesn't mean that you have to go up there, it doesn't mean all of these things. But then she tells her family, and it's hard, but her family helps her through it. She goes and talks in court, which is one of the most admirable things I think you can do, because it's so intimidating and people will come after you and people will say whatever they want about you. But, thankfully, she ends up getting the justice she deserves. And it's a really sweet ending. And then, we find out that Owen actually, so he was supposed to be in the courthouse, but he didn't show up for whatever reason. And we find out it's because he saw Will at a bar or something like that. And he saw him and he just knew all of these horrible things that he did. And so he beat him up. And you know what? I applaud him. But his mom was like, you can't do that. Like, that's just like how, no matter how justifiable you might think it is, unfortunately, you can't do that. So he's being punished. Um, and he's just like a great boyfriend or friend, whatever you want to count him as. He's just like the kind of person you can count on day and night. And then, she kisses him, and it wraps up really nicely. This book touches on a nerve, though, for so many women who have assumptions made about them because they had, peace taken away from them. They've had their sense of safety taken away from them. And I think it's amazing that Sarah Dessen wanted to touch on this at a time where people were so incredibly judgmental, where, everything was the woman's fault or the victim's fault, because, this was before Me Too, before we realized how, I think people knew, but I don't think as many people were aware of how horrible society treats victims and everything. And I know we're far from perfect, but, every little step helps. Every little step is crucial, and everything that, we can do to help out people and victims, regardless of whether it be sexual assault, domestic violence, whatever the cause might be, we should do it. We as people should be helping out others regardless, because no one deserves to go through things like that. No one deserves to question whether or not they're going to feel safe again in their life. Like, that is absurd. And again, if you or somebody you needs help, please give a call to the sexual assault hotline. The number again is 1-800-656-4673, and I will put resources down in the description below. But I just want to say, I'm not going to really end this on the happiest of notes, but I do want to say, people are here for you. You are worthy, you are loved, and if anybody ever needs to reach out, please use the resources below. But I just want to say thank you guys so much for watching. I will be back. I will be back next week with a review of this lullaby, and I think I'm also going to try to do a review of Great Big Beautiful Life by Emily Henry. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you next week. Bye.